NBC 17, the proud home of the Today Show.
On Capitol Hill, the Senate sends the House its HMO reform bill, with President Clinton already threatening a veto if no changes are made. Washington, D.C. payday looks a lot better after the House votes to double the president's salary and give Congress a raise, too. And on the campaign trail with a $30 million war chest, Republican frontrunner George W. Bush says he'll turn down federal matching funds. It's Friday, July 16th, 1999.
This is NBC News at Sunrise, reported by Laurie Stokes.
Good morning, everyone. The battle over medical care reform is moving to the House side of Capitol Hill. The Senate approved a package of reform measures last night, voting largely along party lines. Details now from NBC's Gwen Eiffel.
The Senate's HMO reform bill expands coverage for mastectomy patients and emergency care and provides tax breaks for the self-insured and for long-term care for 48 million Americans. But it's what it doesn't do that has already earned the measure a presidential veto threat.
President Clinton will veto it in a minute. It has zero chance of going past his desk because it's a fraud.
Democrats failed to win passage of a more sweeping measure that would have covered 161 million people and, among other things, allowed patients to sue their HMOs. But Republicans said that was dangerous and would drive small business to cut off insurance to workers.
Dangerous because under the guise of humanitarian concerns, it will drive into the ranks of the uninsured some 1.8 million Americans.
In 4 days of party line votes, every Democratic amendment was defeated, every Republican one passed. For some lawmakers, the outcome was frustrating.
We've had a train wreck.
What have we accomplished for a week here? It seems to me we've let down the American people.
But the politics of this measure played as large a role as the substance, as lawmakers wait to see what the House of Representatives and the president will do.
If he wants to play politics, that's his choice. If he wants to, then we don't have to have a bill.
Now comes the standoff with the White House, as both sides do their best to claim credit or lay blame. Gwen Eiffel, NBC News, the Capitol.
Congress has decided to give itself a raise and double the president's paycheck from $200,000 a year to $400,000. NBC's Andrea Mitchell reports the House passed the measure with virtually no debate.
Bill Clinton will not get a penny from the pay raise, but his successors will. The last time a president got a raise, Richard Nixon was in office. Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. And a family car cost around $3,500. In fact, to keep up with inflation since then, you'd have to pay the president $900,000, 4.5 times his current salary.
The complexity of the world, the complexity of the presidency deserves compensation far beyond free maid service and public housing and public transportation.
Defenders say presidents get a fraction of what corporate CEOs get paid. But critics ask, what about all those White House perks?
This is one of the great views in Washington.
Nice house, gourmet food, free transportation, great entertainment, all on top of his salary.
Have you considered how much it might cost to hire the Marine Band to play at one of your dinner parties? He has Camp David. He has Air Force One. He has the helicopters.
And none of the current job applicants are complaining about the $200,000 salary.
Right now, there doesn't seem to be anybody out there who is saying, I'm not going to apply for this job because it doesn't pay enough. They all seem to want it.
And hidden behind the presidential pay raise, Congress is raising its own salary, a cost of living increase of $4,600, 3.4%, boosting the current Congress's salary as of January to $141,364.
I think it's justified. I think we ought to move forward with it.
But while they can't seem to agree on tax cuts, health care, or gun control, no real debate on the pay raise.
Do the math. Members of Congress can't, but the American people can. This is not about inflation. This is about lining your pockets.
For the past 5 years, Congress has rejected a pay raise. But with a budget surplus and most of the country doing well, the politicians figure finally it's their turn. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
The frontrunner for next year's Republican presidential nomination says he won't need federal matching funds for his campaign. George W. Bush has already raised a fortune, and not taking federal money means that he won't face any spending limits. Details now from NBC's Lisa Myers.
Citing the need for strategic flexibility, Governor Bush says he won't take any taxpayer money for his campaign, which means he can raise and spend as much as he wants.
I want to be in a position between when the primaries end and the convention to have as much flexibility as possible to get out my message. There's a chance I'll be running against somebody who'll be able to jump on a government airplane and travel all over the country making promises.
With a $37 million mountain of cash already, this also means he can overwhelm Republican opponents in key states of Iowa and New Hampshire and keep pace with the deep pockets of publisher Steve Forbes, also able to spend freely because he's using his personal fortune. One Republican, Senator John McCain, criticized Bush, says he's sending an unfortunate message and adding to the already widespread cynicism of voters about the power of special interest money. Campaign reform groups went further.
Well, Governor Bush is turning his back on the principal post-Watergate reform law that's intended to take the White House off the auction block.
But given Democratic abuses in the last election, the sale of the Lincoln bedroom, fundraisers in Buddhist temples, Bush calculates that Al Gore will have a hard time making this an issue. Lisa Myers, NBC News, Washington.
Democratic presidential candidate Bill Bradley has reportedly stockpiled almost as much money as frontrunner Al Gore. According to the Washington Post, there's $9.3 million in Gore's campaign treasury, but he's less than $2 million ahead of Bradley. The Post reports that Gore has had problems building an efficient campaign team, and Bradley has shown himself to be a formidable fundraiser. Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and his wife spent last night at Camp David with President and Mrs. Clinton. Barak was at the White House Thursday for his first peace summit with President Clinton. He is said to believe the Middle East peace process has reached a moment of truth and is ready for painful compromise in the name of peace. Arizona has been hit with yet another round of flash floods. Heavy rain sent a 7-foot wall of water down one canyon, forcing rescuers to airlift 14 hikers out of danger. Dozens of campers had to be evacuated from the Grand Canyon. Coming up here on Sunrise, your morning weather forecast. Also, another heat wave threatens the Northeast with power failures while New York City sues its electric company. And Seattle's $517 million Safeco field opens its doors and its roof. Stock prices made modest gains on Thursday. The Dow Jones Industrials gained more than 38 points, and the NASDAQ index added 21.25. Joining us now with our first look at today's business action from London, CNBC's Sydney Kohara. Good morning to you, Sydney.
Hello, Lori. European markets are mixed this Friday morning, despite more record highs on Wall Street. Here in London, the FTSE is up just 1 point. The British pub war heats up. Whitbread pulled out of a bidding battle royale for spirits maker Allied Domecq's British pubs business. Whitbread's move came after its offer was referred to antitrust regulators. The withdrawal now appears to leave the field clear for fierce rival Punch Taverns, who could take advantage of the situation and reduce its bid. We're also keeping a close eye on the euro after the European Central Bank president suggested a possible change in sentiment toward higher interest rates. Currency traders yesterday called it the first good news in months for the single European currency, but it gave the currency only a very brief half-cent jump. In Asia overnight, a tumble in high-tech stocks pushed the Nikkei 183 points lower. And in Hong Kong, a sharp sell-off after China reinforced a threat to invade if Taipei declared independence. The Hang Seng 213 points lower. And that's the latest business news. Lori, back to you.
All right, Sydney Kohar. Have a good weekend. Thanks, Sydney. Baseball returned from its all-star break last night with a full schedule of games and the debut of a brand new ballpark, Seattle's Safeco Field. The most expensive baseball stadium in history opened as the Mariners hosted San Diego. Seattle's David Bell banged out the first hit at the park, but the Padres ruined the party, taking a 3-2 decision. Randy Johnson continues to be the unluckiest pitcher in baseball. The big unit left after 8 innings with a 2-0 lead over Texas, but receiver Matt Manti surrendered Mark McLemore's bases loaded double in the bottom of the ninth to propel the Rangers to a thrilling 3-2 victory. The umpire's promise to resign may have come too late for the White Sox. It looks like umpire Paul Neward blew an all call on what should have been a game-ending double play. St. Louis went on to win 3-2 in 13 innings. And finally, the British Open got underway in Scotland with the average score a startling 78. There were some memorable shots, however. Santiago Luna conquered the 10th hole with this eagle. The final 2 rounds of the Grand Slam event can be seen this weekend on NBC. It's a look at sports. Now let's take a look at the weather. The morning line of showers and thunderstorms extend from Minnesota southwest into the northern Texas panhandle early this morning. The heat wave's going to continue to build from the mid-Atlantic states. And that's a look at the national weather. Now let's take a look at your local forecast. In Boston, 91 and sunny. In New York City, 94, sunny. Nation's capital, about 94. Also sunshine prevails. Atlanta, 87, partly sunny. Miami, 90 with scattered thunder showers. And Chicago, little morning showers and 90 degrees. Coming up on NBC News at sunrise, including your weekend travel weather and the latest headlines. It's Friday, July 16th. Here are some of the stories we're following this morning on NBC News at Sunrise. The stage is set for a new political battle over patients' rights as the Senate sends the House a bill the president threatens to veto. Meantime, House members vote themselves a $4,600 annual pay raise while doubling the salary of the next president. And Texas Governor George W. Bush says he'll turn down federal matching funds for his primary campaign and the spending limits that go with them. More now on our top story. Last night's Senate passage of a managed health care reform bill. NBC's Joe Johns reports on the narrow victory for the Republicans.
All but 2 Senate Republicans voted in favor of the GOP health care reform legislation. All Senate Democrats voted against the bill. To the end, they disagreed over whether the modest measures that passed were better than nothing at all.
We, in fact, did protect patients. We did improve the quality of health care. Maybe not as much as some would suggest we could. I would differ with that. But we did do something positive.
The first winner is the status quo. We all know that the result of the efforts of the last 4 days will be nothing.
The Republican bill gives some new rights and protections to 48 million Americans in so-called self-insured group health plans, including expanded medical coverage for emergency care and for mastectomy patients. It also gives new tax breaks for health insurance to the self-employed and sets up an appeals process for people who have been denied coverage by their providers. The White House and Democrats who hope this issue can resonate with voters in the next election quickly threatened a veto from the president.
It has 0 chance of going past his desk because it's a fraud.
Members of the House are still struggling with the issue of a patient's Bill of Rights, but the leadership hopes to schedule a vote on a bill before the end of the summer. Joe Johns, NBC News, the Capitol.
Forecasters say the record-high temperatures already recorded in some places may be an indicator of a long, hot summer. NBC's George Lewis reports on the difficulty some power companies are having keeping up with the demand for electricity.
Blackout in New York. Some streets and homes darkened, subways stalled, 200,000 people sweltering without air conditioning. And now the city is suing the local utility giant, Consolidated Edison, calling the blackout an act of gross negligence.
The lawsuit seeks a court order requiring Con Edison to redesign its local distribution system to meet the demands of the city of New York.
Heavy air conditioning use in a heat wave last week triggered the blackout when power cables burned out and parts of the system were shut down to avoid further damage.
Weather will affect our ability to deliver electricity more than anything else.
Perhaps New York could learn a lesson from Texas. Last year, when the state had a record heat wave, the power stayed on. The answer? Plan ahead.
It's important to understand that Texas is hot, and we plan year-round for extreme summer temperatures. It's a way of life in Texas.
A growing U.S. population, a roaring economy, and more technology mean more and more power use. In the last 30 years, the demand for electricity shot up 167% to 3.2 trillion kilowatt hours last year. Our high-tech lives depend on electricity more than ever. That's why New York is suing and hoping to avoid more blackouts this summer. George Lewis, NBC News.
Just ahead, CNBC's Kevin McCullough with some financial planning advice for unmarried couples and your weekend travel forecast. It's a touchy subject in many ways, unmarried couples living together. CNBC's Kevin McCullough says those significant others need to do some financial planning. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Laurie.
What kind of financial planning are we talking about?
Well, the first thing is, how are you going to divide up the basic household expenses? Now, the Institute of Certified Financial Planners recommends that unmarried couples set up a joint account for things like food, rent, utilities, but keep separate accounts to cover personal expenses such as clothing and, well, college loan payments, for example. But don't assume this kind of living arrangement involves just young adults moving in together to get started. About 10% of the households in the country with adult couples involve unmarried couples, including, well, people committed to each other for life and seniors who live together just to save on expenses.
So is there something that's a counterpart to a prenup agreement between married couples?
Well, the Planners Institute uses the term a living together contract, something written out to say how property will be divided in the event of a breakup. And while married couples often have legal rights on the property, unmarrieds don't. However, the group warns that these contracts are not enforceable in all states. And further out the time horizon, there's the need for a power of attorney so one partner can make decisions in the event the other becomes incapacitated and even a will. And note in all of this, I'm not getting into the moral questions here, just the financial planning.
Right, just the money. Are there certain tax considerations that you're supposed to account for?
Yeah. When it comes to income taxes, unmarried partners with similar incomes are usually better off than marrieds because they avoid what's commonly called the marriage penalty. On the other hand, one partner with larger income can't use the tax deductions arising from the other partner's activities the way marrieds can, so maybe it balances out a little. And while more companies are now extending benefits to the partners of their workers, unmarried partners, any payments might be construed as taxable income. So if that arises, people should consult a tax advisor about that. Incidentally, though, Congress is considering changing the tax law to get rid of that marriage penalty, but we'll have to wait on that one.
All right, CNBC's Kevin McCullough joining us. Good to see you, Kevin. Thank you.
You're welcome. See ya.
And the boss is back in New Jersey last night. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band performed together in America for the first time in more than a decade. It's Friday, July 16th. I'm Laurie Stokes. This is NBC News at Sunrise. Good weekend to you.
Speedway in the Utah desert. I pick up my money, head back into town, driving across the Waynesburg County line. I got the radio on, but I'm just killing time, working all day in my daddy's garage, driving all night, chasing some mirage. Pretty soon, little girl, I'm gonna take charge, but the dogs on the street howl. They understand if I could take this money to my hands. Mr. I ain't a boy, no, I'm a man. And I believe in a promised land. I've done my best to live right way.
Sunrise is a presentation of NBC News. More Americans watch NBC News than any other news organization in the world.
This morning, the Beach Boys bring the surf sound to the summer concert series. Brought to you by the incredible edible egg, only on Today.
Finally this morning, the changing face of Wall Street. NBC's Ann Thompson reports on the latest evidence of the difference between men and women.
Wall Street, home to the bulls and the bears, where millions are won and lost each day. Considered by many the ultimate boys club. 86% male on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, 79% of the traders in securities firms. But on Main Street, personal investing is no longer just a man's game. Women now make up almost half of all investors across the country. And a recent University of California at Davis study shows that while men buy and sell 50% more than women, women actually make 1.5% more on their investments. In suburban Dallas, 23-year-old Mark Grossfeld trades 2 to 3 times a month. He's in the black despite being tempted by some risky internet stocks. One even cost him 40% of his investment.
It's kind of fun to watch the volatility as opposed to watching a stock creep up.
But clinical psychologist Rosalind Schrenka is willing to wait. Like the women in the study, security is her goal. She belongs to a women's investment club. Its portfolio up 8.5% this year.
Our philosophy has been to buy good companies and hold them. We'd like to see them double in value in 5 years.
Indeed, over the last 5 years, the average stock fund rose 22%. Investment advisor Robert Markman saw the difference between men and women last summer when the market plunged 20%. Some men panicked and sold. His female clients sat tight.
The men tended to want to make moves much more frequently and much more aggressively than the women did. They wanted to react to what was going on. The women tended to want to know what's going on.
And men and women differ when it comes to the stocks they pick.
Analysts say women prefer more secure investments. They are more likely than men to consider mutual funds, but far less likely to take a big financial risk.
Wall Street has gotten the message. In some firms, women are the fastest growing segment of their clientele.
In 3 years, we increased the women's percentage of our client base from 28% to over 40%.
The bottom line, according to the authors of the California study, women aren't necessarily great investors. It's just that men are worse. And with the stock market doing so well, many believe that old Wall Street adage applies to both sexes. Don't confuse brains with a bull market. Ann Thompson, NBC News, Chicago.
That's our report this Friday morning here on Sunrise. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a terrific weekend.